In the morning, Sabina and James already talked about the methodology part of AF methodology. I mean, the theoretical part of the AF methodology. So this afternoon, let's try to a bit relax. Gisela and we are going to give you the case studies of how we apply the AF methodology to different countries. And the topic we are talking is about the Global MPI, which is a very standard application of the AF methodology. We use a very standard methodology, including the same data, same weights, same dimension, same cutoffs, same indicators that James mentioned this morning. Why we do that? Because we want to do the global comparisons. Just like $1.9 a day, we want to make sure we use the same standard to do the global comparison. Okay, and also Sabina mentioned, actually AF methodology can also be used in the national or regional level. So tomorrow, if I remember correct, the last session, Monica, Gisela again, and also Adriana will give a case study on the national level to show you how we apply the AF methodology into regional and the national level. So let's back to our slides. As I mentioned, it's a joint session between Gisela and I. So I will be the starter to talk about what is the Global MPI. And later I will use a China case study to give you more specific ideas. And after me, Gisela will talk about the 2016 Global MPI findings and also the changes over time using Africa cases. I think some of you must be very interested. So what is the Global MPI? The Global MPI draws the Global MPI is an indicator draws up on the multidimensional property by Sabina and James. You can see a paper in 2011, which is published by Sabina and James in Journal of Public Economics. I list it here. The Global MPI is an international comparable index of acute poverty for more than 100 countries, developing countries. The Global MPI was developed by OFI in Oxford in collaboration with the UNDP's Human Development Report Office. And as many of you might know, it was launched in 2010 in Human Development Report. And ever since then, it has been updated several times. You can see more information in OFI's website. It carries a lot of MPI in greater details, including the subnational data, indicator level details, maps, graphs, and so on. And also, I'm sure in the next few days in our OFI summer school session, you will learn most of it. And also, MPI can be used on national and regional level as well. So here is a schematic to describe the measurement itself. As you can see, we have 3 dimensions: health, education, and living standard in the Global MPI. They are kind of equally important, aren't they? So what does the Global MPI do is give the 3 dimensions equal weights. So 1/3 for health, 1/3 for education, and 1/3 for living standard. The next question would be how we represent these dimensions. Well, we're using 10 indicators to represent these 3 dimensions, like nutrition and child mortality for health, years of schooling and school attendance for education, cooking fuel, improved sanitation, safe drinking water, electricity, flooring, asset ownership for living standard. And again, an intuitive question would be how we give weights for each indicator. Think about it. Maybe each of the indicator within the same dimension, they may have the same importance in translating the dimension from the reality to the measurement, right? So what does the Global MPI do is we decided to give equal weights for each indicator within certain dimensions. So let's have a look. We can see, for example, nutrition and child mortality, they have a weight of 1/6. How do we get this number? You see, the health, its weight is 1/3, right? And 2 is within. So we use 1/3 divided by 2 indicators, 1/6. 1/6 for each indicator. And it's same for the school years of schooling and school attendance in education. And because you see there are 6 indicators in the living standard, so we use 1/3 divided by 6, and we got 1/18 for each indicator. Okay. So after the indicator, let's come to the cutoffs. It shows us how we define if someone is deprived in certain indicator or not. So we can go through one by one. Someone is deprived in child mortality if any child has died in the household. Someone is deprived in nutrition if any adult or child is malnourished in the family. Someone is deprived in years of schooling if no household member aged 10 years and older has completed 5 years of schooling. Deprived in child attendance if any school-aged child is not attending school up to the age at class 8. And for the electricity, it's quite simple. If the household does not have electricity, they are deprived in this indicator. And improved sanitation, if the house sanitation facility is not improved, or it's improved but need to share with others, we consider it's deprived. Deprived in drinking water, if the household cannot access to the improved drinking water, or we have to go a long way, like to get the safe drinking water. How long is the distance? Like by walking, 30 minutes or more, we consider it's deprived. Deprived in flooring, if the household has a dirt, sand, dung, or some unspecific others, we consider the household is deprived in floor material. Yes, please.
Sorry, for the first one, how you mentioned for the indicators, do you have any defined age group for the child? Age group of the child?
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you. So usually we define the child is under 5. It's like a WHO define. But in the Global MPI, we are not so strict about it. Because the data we got, the data source we got is mixed or DHS mainly about this data set. The questionnaire within it does not constrain the age of the child information. So we consider, basically we consider any child maybe under 16 or something. If someone can correct me? Okay, okay.
You define under 16 as child? Yes.
Okay, is that clear? Okay. So let me go on. Where do I? Cooking fuel, right? If someone is deprived in cooking fuel, if the household cooks with dung, wood, or charcoal. Why? Because this kind of cooking fuel can create a lot of smokes, which is not healthy for the household members. And deprived in asset ownership, if the household does not own more than one radio, TV, telephone, bag, motorbike, refrigerator, fridge, or does not own a car or truck. Clear? So, are you with me? So far, we have already given introduction like what is the Global MPI and about the dimensions, indicators, weights, and their cutoffs. Okay, so the next very practical and also important question would be how we define when someone is MPI poor. So here, actually, I need you to remember 2 things. The first one is the AF methodology. Take a look at how many weighted dimensions and indicators is a person deprived in, namely the depression score. So the first concept, depression score, James already mentioned about it, remember? So first thing I want you to remember is depression score. And how we define someone is poor. A person who is deprived in 1/3 or more of the weighted indicators is MPI poor. So which means if someone's depression score is equal and larger than 1/3 or 33.33%, we consider someone is poor. So the second number I want you to remember is 33.33%. If someone's depression score is equal and larger than 33.33%, someone is MPI poor. Okay? Let's do a personal level case study. So this lady is called Rosalind. She's from Cameroon. She's 55 years old. If we look at the top picture, we can see she's farming with few of her family members. And she managed to harvest a bowl of peanuts. And she told us, after the harvest, I need to go to collect some wood, crop waste, and down for cooking. She had to collect them at her cooking field. So which means definitely she was deprived in the cooking field. Okay. And also when we come to her family, we find there's no toilet in the household and there's no electricity. And also her floor was made of earth, just earth. So we consider that Rosalind and her family member are deprived in cooking field, sanitation, electricity, and flooring in the standard of living. Okay. And the good thing is we find there's, oh, yes, please.
If they have the ability to buy better cooking fuel, but they just choose to use that to save money, do we consider them to be different?
Yeah, we respect the choice. They are using that, especially for the cooking fuel, because cooking fuel use the crop waste, create a lot of smoke, which is really bad to the family member. Yeah. So the good thing is, actually, there's no family member suffer from the health problem. No child died in the household. So Rosalind is not deprived in health. But we find, actually, some of the school-aged children are not in school. For example, this boy, he's not going to school. He has to work with Rosalind to do some farm work. So we can see that Rosalind and her family member are deprived in school attendance. And based on all of the information, we find Rosalind's depression score is 39%. So 39% compared with 33.33 is higher, right? So Rosalind is MPI poor. So the next case study. Nathalie Longman, she's also from Cameroon, and she's quite young. She's only 20 years old. See from the picture, we can see she and her family member are living in the house with earth floor again, and she's deprived definitely on flooring. And when we come to her house, we find there's no electricity, no toilet, no safe drinking water for them, and also same as Rosalind, they need to collect crop waste and dump for the cooking field. And the only small assets in their family is a bicycle. Even they don't have a radio. So we consider actually Nathalie is deprived in every single indicator within the living standard dimension. Kind of good thing is no family member are deprived in education dimension, but they are suffering problem from the health, and also they have experienced that child death in their family. So we can see that actually Nathalie and her family member are deprived in health dimension and living standard dimension. So the total depression score for her is 67%. Again, we compare these two numbers, 67%, 33.33, right? It's higher. So she is MPI poor. Yes, please.
67 for the population or the
It's
or the household, the percentage, 67.
It's her depression score. It's like actually it's two-thirds.
Yeah.
So it's not a percentage.
From the household.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm. So actually, we have many case studies for you. You can see the following link. After class, you can try to explore by yourself. But the story is not the end. We are not just telling stories. I want to show you how we really calculate the MPI from the individual level. So you can see how you actually calculate it. But next question actually is kind of question from the micro level to macro level. So from the personal level, which means how we go from one person being poor to an overall measurement of poverty. So remember that formula Sabina and James talked about? So actually MPI equals H multiplied by A. What is H? H is the percentage of people who are poor among the whole population, right? It's kind of macro level data, right? It's a macro indice, sorry. And also A, what is A? A is the intensity of people's deprivation, the average share of dimensions people suffer at the same time. It's another macro level indice. So when we multiply these two indices, we got the whole nations or countries global MPI result, M0 or MPI. So basically, that's a simple introduction, the brief introduction of the global MPI. And I want to talk about this before my next few slides about the China's case study, because James actually already talked about it. MPI had very good property of breaking down, and we call it high resolution. Why we call it like this? It's because if we break down the MPI by age, it will give us information on how many people are poor. If we break down by A, it will show us how poor they are, like their average intensity, average deprivation score. And by dimension, it will show how people are poor. What does it mean? Dimension, you remember, we have 3 dimensions, 10 indicators. We know that which kind of indicator or dimension are most likely to be deprived among the poor people. And also by subgroup, we know who are poor. What does it mean? So if we divided the whole population in 2 exclusive groups, for example, rural and urban, we might explore that whether rural people are poorer than the urban, or the opposite, or they are the similar. So we'll know some information like this. So let's come to a case study. Here is a case study I'm using. Actually, it's not the data from NBS, of course. It's from the CFPS. Yes, please.
Sorry, in the subgroup division, we will break down the different groups. If they are not equal, the presumption in the discussion when Professor Costa was divided into 2 equal groups. However, that doesn't happen in the real world. Like we will have different causes, different provinces, so population size is different, geographic size is different. So
Population share.
how do you calculate the probability that is?
Yeah, we consider the population share. If you see the formula about the subgroup decomposition, you will see actually we will consider the population share. And also I will show you that kind of information in the following slides. Any question? Any question? Okay, I will go on. So the structure for my case study is divided by 3 parts. First, I will talk about the monetary poverty situation in China, which Professor Li Shi also already give you a very clear introduction. I just give a brief one. And second, of course, I will give you the results of the global MPI of China using the global standard, and show you according to the high resolution questions. And the third question is, I want to come back to the 2 measurements to see what's the relationship between these two measurements for poverty. So the first question, what is the monetary poverty in China? So as Professor Li Shi already mentioned, China actually achieved a remarkable achievement in the past 30 years. According to UNDP report, from 1990s to 2011, China has lifted 439 million people out of poverty. And here this graph gives the incidence of income poverty in China. And basically we can find the incidence of the poverty keep on reducing. But the different area, these two different areas, that's because Chinese government have adjusted and try to increase the income poverty line to try to involve more poor people. And especially I want to mention is about 2010, you can see the government almost doubled the poverty line from 1247 to 2300 RMB, which is equal $1.6 a day by the 2005 PPP. So the next question, how about the global MPI how about China's global MPI result? So our data set is use CFPS 2012. CFPS is short for China Family Panel Studies. It's a data set collected by Peking University. And using data set and also the global standard, we find there are 5.2% of people who are MPI poor in China. Although it's kind of small incidence, but it still affects more than 75 million people in China. And among these poor people, we find their average depression score, or they are experiencing an average depression of 43.2% among all of the weighted indicators. And this leads to a global MPI of China, M0, of 0.023. Here I will show you an incidence of multidimensional poverty in 101 countries that OFI have calculated using the global standard. And you can see China is here. So again, this graph shows that China's global MPI is not that high. So let's come to, actually is a resolution question number 3. So who are poor? First, I will give you some results in terms of graphics. This table gives you the M0, H, and A, and together with their confidence interval, and within the exclusive subgroups, rural, urban, east, central, and west. And here, hope I can answer your question. We also consider about the population share for each subgroup, okay? And this pie chart actually is kind of different idea that I want you to only focus on the MPI poor people, like consider them as 100%. So this graph actually shows you what the proportion of each subgroup occupies. So basically, for example, the top pie chart, we can see that among all of the MPI poor people, only about 20% that come from urban area. The rest, they come from rural area. And then we consider the population share again. We find it's like a 50% to 50%. But however, we see from the chart that actually most of the poor people, they are from rural area. Okay, so that's the basic idea of the pie. But we need to focus back to the table. So basically, we find if we compare rural and urban, we find rural people who are living in the rural area are significantly higher than poorer than the people who are living in urban place. You can see the number. So it's significantly higher if you consider the confidence interval. And also, people who are living in the western regions, they are significantly poorer than who are living in the east and central regions. And the next subgroup is divided by household heads characters. This graph shows in terms of years of schooling of the household head, what we get. Basically, we find the household head with no education, you see the first line, their M0 result is the highest compared to the rest. And another trend is we find the higher of the education for the household head, the lower of the M0 result they have. So, but again, we need to notice that here, these two results actually don't have significant difference. So that's what we observe in terms of years of schooling of the household head. Okay, and according to the subgroup of the social groups, we also find some very interesting results. For example, we find that in terms of migration, the migration action is actually usually associated with the poor M0 result, like the lower M0 result. So especially we find, for example, the people who are whole family moving from the rural area to migrate from rural to urban, their M0 is significantly less compared to the local rural residents. So you see what I mean? So if people are migrant, they are likely to be poor. Okay, and also in terms of the ethnicity, we find the minority are significantly poorer than the majority. But there's no differences between the religions and the non-religions. Okay? Okay. So the high resolution question number 4, how are they poor? Here I show you a graph. It gives the information of percentage of people who are poor and who are multidimensional poor and deprived. Actually, it gives you the sensor headcount ratio of each of the indicators. And simply speaking, the higher the column, the higher possibility of people being poor. So basically, we find nutrition, years of schooling, cooking fuel, and safe drinking water are the indicators most likely to be deprived among the poor people, I mean. Okay, so my next question and final question would be, what's the relationship between the income and the MPI poor? Again, according to the CFPS 2012, and together using the China's official poverty line, not the World Bank line, we find there are 30.7% of people who are income poor. And at the same time, 5.2% of people who are MPI poor. So I suppose to ask you to think about this question, but yesterday Sabina have already given you the answer. So, but try to forget it. So how do you think income poor, the relationship between the income poor and MPI poor? Are they separately or overlap or something in between? No. Yeah, I think you already know the answer. So nobody will think about this relationship, right? No? No, okay. So the answer is we find only 2% of people who are both income poor and MPI poor. The result is kind of quite unexpected, but it also gives us an idea of MPI could be a very good complementary to the income poverty. Okay, so that's all my slides, and I will leave my time to Gisela, and afterwards questions are welcome.
Thank you, Yangyang. So before going into the findings of this 2016 Global MPI, I will first describe the data. The data used to produce this year's findings, this is for 102 countries. We have more than half of the countries we analyzed the demographic and health survey data coordinated by USAID. In more than a third of countries, we analyzed multiple cluster indicator surveys coordinated by UNICEF, 3 Pan-Arab project for family health surveys, and 7 national surveys. These are for some countries such as Argentina, Brazil, China, as you saw the case study that Yangyang presented, Ecuador, Jamaica, Mexico, and South Africa. And the data is constrained, the data that we present is constrained from 2005 till 2015. So we have data for countries that have surveys before 2005, for instance. We have data for Angola in the year 2000. But we choose not to present it all together with the rest of the countries because we think that they are not comparable. 10-year span, it's chosen as the way to assure comparability across data. So we think that, for instance, Angola and other countries for which we have data before 2005, it would be not a very good practice to have the same data, to have them together with data for instance, 2015. So in this year we present, we updated 14 data sets for 102 countries. Please note that when we started in 2010, there were 104 countries with, for which we get countries on and off, depending on the newest data set that we get. We also are updating our estimates. So as I mentioned, in 2010, the data comprised a window of 8-9 years, from 2000 till 2008. But as time goes by and the surveys get improved and readily, very quickly, we can update our data. And in this year update, we have 3/4 of the countries have data from 2010 and onwards, and half of the countries have data from 2012 onwards. So it's really a very the most recent data that we can get. As Sabine explained, we have even data from 2015, which is last year. And a very important attribute of the MPI is that it can be decomposed in 962 regions, as we will see later on. Now, I'm here just describing the data, population coverage by region. 5.3 billion people in this, live in these 102 countries that we analyze. And the pie chart shows the distribution of where these people live. Most of them are in East Asia and the Pacific, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And for these 3 regions, we have a coverage of 93% and above. So we have a good coverage in terms of population of at least the most populated regions of the world. We also have coverage by income category. In combining low and middle income countries, we get a 93% coverage. And for these 3 specific categories, low income and middle income countries, we achieve a coverage of 87% and above. So, well, you probably can see that we have no coverage of high income countries, OECD. And virtually no or very small coverage of high-income countries, non-OECD. Now, some of the findings, I'll try and stop on this chart a bit, because I saw that there were some problems between understanding the population share and the results. So the pie on your left-hand side shows the population share of per income category. So we see that in these 102 countries, almost half of the people live in lower middle income countries, more than a third live in upper middle income countries, and only 10% live in low income countries. If we were not expecting any relationship between an income category and multidimensional poverty, we would expect to see more or less this similar distribution of multidimensional poverty across income categories. But obviously, we don't. Most of the poor, that is 3/4 of the poor, live in middle-income countries. And low-income countries have also a larger share. You can see that in terms of population, they only host, or only 10% of the population live in low-income countries. But in terms of poverty, we see that one quarter of the multidimensionally poor people identified in these 102 countries are living in low-income category countries. Now, this graph analyzes the relationship between incidence and intensity, the two indicators of the MPI. The horizontal axis shows the incidence of poverty or multidimensional poverty headcount, and the vertical axis shows the average intensity of poverty A. We see first good positive relationship. So for instance, we don't see a flat line. That means that average intensity of poverty does add information to the headcount ratio. We can also see that for a similar headcount ratio, there are different intensities across countries. So for instance, if you focus yourself in between 50 and 60% of headcount ratio, we see a variation of intensity that goes, for instance, as low as Malawi and as high as India, which is the larger bubble on the chart. The size of the bubbles represent the number of MPI poor people in each country. And we also see a relationship between the colors. You can see that the colors identify income categories. The red color identify low-income countries, clusters at the top right corner, whereas the green colors cluster at the bottom left corner. But this relationship is far from perfect. We will discuss it in further graphs, because the red color spreads out as low as Nepal comes. And also the beige and green colors also spread up further. So this relationship exists, but it's far from perfect. Now that I'm talking about the relationship between poverty, between the multidimensional poverty, I would like to relate it to what we observe as income poverty. But first, I have to explain the data. The data is not similar in many ways. So for 86 countries, we have observations of multidimensional poverty and income poverty. But even in those cases, the years of surveys are different. So we have to draw comparisons carefully. We also see that for some countries, we have multidimensional poverty data, but not income data, such as Egypt, South Sudan, Yemen, Libya. And we also see that in 55 cases, the MPI data is more recent than the income one. At the same time, we don't have information on MPI poverty for some countries for which there is income poverty data, such as Botswana, Bulgaria, and some other countries in Latin America and East Asia. we compare the headcount ratios for MPI poverty and in dollar a day poverty, this chart tries to do that. The high of the bars, of the beige bars, represent the headcount ratio for multidimensional poverty, with some red bars representing the measure of destitution, a more intense deprivation of the multidimensional poor. And the black dots represent the dollar a day headcount ratio for some countries. Again, we see a rough positive relationship, so as income poverty moves up, we also see that multidimensional poverty goes up. But a few and we also see that income poverty tends to be equal or below the multidimensional poverty headcount ratio. Some important cases are Uzbekistan, Swaziland, Lesotho, and Madagascar, which are the outliers that we see over here. Here, and over there, for which income poverty, the income poverty headcount ratio is much larger than the multidimensional poverty headcount ratio. And some cases such as Bhutan and Ethiopia, in which income poverty is much lower than the multidimensional headcount ratio. Now, in this graph, we are plotting the gross national income per capita per countries and the multidimensional poverty headcount ratio. And the relationship is far from perfect, as you can see. At very low levels of MPI, less than 5%, for instance, of MPR poor people, we see a huge variation of gross national income in the country, going as low as 12,050 for Kyrgyzstan or 15,000 for Barbados. And at the same time, low levels of GNI per capita, lower than, for instance, 1,000, show a huge variation of MPI poverty, going as low as 29% in Nepal to 91% in South Sudan. And we see the similar relationship between gross national income per capita and dollar a day headcount ratio, in which low levels of income poverty headcount ratio show a huge variation of gross national income from 1,000 till 13,000, and low levels of gross national income show, again, huge variation in income poverty from 13.5 to 82%. Now, bearing in mind that the years of the surveys are different, we can also compare this coverage across the world. We see that the dollar a day does have a few more countries surveyed than the multidimensional poverty, 122 to be precise versus 102. Although please note that we are excluding some countries because we don't consider the data comparable, such as Angola, Myanmar, yes, a few other, Central and Eastern Europe. We also have data for those countries, but this is very old, and we don't put it in the map in order to assure comparability. In this year MPI launch, we focus on Africa, and just looking at this map of the incidence of both measures, having the same scales of colors in both maps, in which the red color indicates more poverty. We see that for the African country, it is slightly more red in the case of the MPI incidence than in the case of the dollar a day. And we also have data for South Sudan and Somalia, for which dollar a day does not have data. Furthermore, an important feature is that we can disaggregate into, in this case only for Africa, 475 subnational regions, which gives a great resolution of poverty and a more nuanced picture. We can also further disaggregate each of these subnational regions into headcount ratio, average intensity, and the composition of all the 10 indicators. And analyze the distribution of poverty, for instance, across climatic regions. The red, we identify that the red belt across the middle of Africa comprises the climatic zone of the Sahel and Sudanian savanna, which has suffered repetitive droughts since the 1970s. Given that MPI poverty and income poverty are different, we see a different distribution across regions of Africa of these two indices. In terms of multidimensional poverty, this is higher, well, the incidence of multidimensional poverty is higher in East Africa, as the pie on your left-hand side on your right-hand side, my left-hand side, as the pie on the right-hand side shows, as opposed to monetary poverty, where this is concentrated in West Africa. We can also break the MPI down into its indicators and continue the comparison analysis, the comparative analysis to draw implications for policy. So, for instance, if we compare child mortality in West Africa, we see that it's higher than in East Africa, as opposed to nutrition, which is lower in West Africa than in East Africa. And in general, all the living standard indicators have lower incidence among the poor in West Africa than in East Africa, except, also including cooking fuel as well. Also, please note the height of the last bar in this chart, the gray bar, because that is the headcount ratio. And if you remember, the third question of James Foster's lecture this morning was whether the headcount ratio could be higher than the censored whether the censored headcount ratios could be higher than the multidimensional poverty headcount ratio, and the answer was no. So we see the same. We see this in all of the graphics in this slide. We launched our MPI in Côte d'Ivoire in Abidjan on the 2nd of June, and we draw some lessons from the case of Côte d'Ivoire analysis. This map shows the MPI level of in the country, showing that the northern part of the country is the poorest. We can compare these subnational images across the neighboring countries and get a more nuanced picture of the analysis of poverty. If we compare, for instance, Côte d'Ivoire against its neighbor Ghana, we see that poverty appears to be much higher than in Ghana, but we can also compare among the neighbors of the north and understand that the type of poverty that it's shaping the region. This table orders countries by their MPI, selected countries, and has information on their gross national income. We can compare, for instance, that Côte d'Ivoire has even larger GNI per capita than Togo, but Togo actually has lower multidimensional poverty. We can also see that average intensity of poverty in Nigeria, 56.8%, is larger than in Côte d'Ivoire, which is 52.8%. That means that a poor person in Nigeria is deprived on average in more indicators than in Côte d'Ivoire, but yet the MPI of Nigeria is lower. than the MPI of Cote d'Ivoire. This is because the headcount ratio is much lower in Nigeria than in Cote d'Ivoire. Yeah. So it's 53% against 58%, almost 59%. We can also compare the case of Cote d'Ivoire and Cameroon with very similar dollar-a-day poverty, but in which Cameroon has much lower multidimensional poverty than Cote d'Ivoire, almost 10% lower. We can break down the composition of poverty in Cote d'Ivoire by indicator to see that cooking fuel and sanitation are the privations that most that most of the people faced in this country, of the poor people faced in this country. That rural poverty is higher than urban poverty, and we can disaggregate the levels and the composition of each of the regions in Cote d'Ivoire. We are not only interested in describing the data, but how it can be better used for leaving no one behind, that is targeting the poorest of the poor, designing the best institutions to execute these anti-poverty programs more efficiently, and finally achieving the goals, the national goals in terms of fighting poverty. For this, we have analyzed how success against poverty is being achieved across regions, and in order to inform and replicate this success, my colleagues Christophe Gindra and Anna Vaz led the comparison across time of countries. This is when we have 2 points of 2-point estimates for the same country. When we have 2-point estimates for the same country, we harmonize the data in order to be comparable across both information, and we get confidence intervals to know whether this comparison is at least statistically significantly different or not in terms of the MPI indices. So we carried out this analysis, for instance, for Cote d'Ivoire and 35 other countries in Africa. And we see that Cote d'Ivoire have reduced MPI, H, and A statistically significantly in the period of references, which is from 2005 to 2012. But the population growth led to an increase of the number of poor people. So as you can see, in 2005, given the headcount ratio and the population at that time, we saw 10.7 million people. But in 2012, given the headcount, given even a lower incidence of poverty, but a larger population in the country, we see 10.9 million people. We also can tell which are the indicators responsible for this poverty reduction, which is school attendance, child mortality, electricity, sanitation, drinking water, and asset ownership. And we can we have this type of analysis for 35 sub-Saharan countries, 234 subnational regions within these 35 sub-Saharan countries, covering 800 million people. Of that has been strictly harmonized in order to be comparable, and analyzed changes have been reported in order to make the comparison. In order to make a further comparison for countries that have a long year span between surveys, and so for instance, the largest span, as far as I remember, is Comoros from 2000 till 2010. So the observations are very far from each other, so the chances that changes have been very big are greater. whereas some countries that have smaller comparison windows, such as, for instance, Rwanda from 2010 to 2015, it's only 5-year window of comparison in which the changes we would observe would be much, well, we expect that they would be much smaller. The country that reduced poverty the fastest among all the countries was Rwanda. It reduced absolute annualized poverty in terms of MPI, H, A. It also reduced the number of poor people, and it reduced it in every subnational region and every indicator. After Rwanda, we see some other countries that follow closely are Ghana, Liberia, Comoros, DRC, and Tanzania. Again, some other countries would argue, well, we don't have the same level of poverty. We have much less poverty, so we cannot reduce as fast as other countries the poverty that we face in our own country. So in order to bring this information forward, we report reduction of poverty relative to the initial value of poverty in each country. And for this, South Africa had the fastest reduction of poverty, the fastest relative reduction of poverty, followed by Congo, Ghana, and Comoros. We also identified regional runaways, little regions that had a great success in fighting poverty. They fight poverty even faster than Rwanda as a country. And some of these regions are actually located in Rwanda. But some other of these regions are located in Republic of Congo, DRC, Mauritania, Mali, Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. We also want to know whether there was a specific pattern of poverty reduction in Africa, and unfortunately we didn't find any single pattern. For instance, if we compare the annualized changes of global MPI and income poverty for selected countries, and showing on the red bars the change in MPI, annualized change in MPI, and showing in green bars the annualized change in dollar a day, we see that the countries that reduce poverty the fastest in terms of MPI, located on your left-hand side of the graph, starting with Rwanda, Ghana, Republic of Congo, and so on, show different type of changes in terms of income poverty. For some of them, income poverty actually increased in the period of reference, and for some of them, income poverty actually decreased. And this pattern also is replicated in the right-hand side of the chart, meaning that there is really different relationships between multidimensional poverty and income poverty. Because because we are also interested in looking at the initial level of poverty and looking at whether the poorest countries and poorest regions have reduced poverty the fastest or not. We have drawn in this graph on the horizontal axis the initial level of multidimensional poverty and the annualized absolute change of MPI on the vertical axis. This would be the speed at which they reduce poverty. And this being raised to the bottom, we see Rwanda leading the race, followed by Liberia, Ghana, Comoros. But we see that actually the poorest regions that are located on the right-hand side of the graph are not really reducing poverty at the same pace as fast as the rest of the of the regions. We can do this as well at subnational regions, and this is the example of Côte d'Ivoire. Northeast is the region that is furthest to the right. That means that it had the highest poverty in the initial year. But we also see that the speed at which it reduced its poverty was the strongest, going further down. So in this case, the poorest region did reduce poverty the fastest, making it no longer the poorest region of Côte d'Ivoire. Now the poorest regions of Côte d'Ivoire are north and northwest, as we saw in the initial map. I can bring it back if you don't remember. Here. So we see now that northwest is the poorest region, followed by north, and northeast has reduced poverty. Okay, well, some reflections that we have gathered from statisticians and policymakers on this year's launch of new and release of new results. So we want to share this with you in order to show you how this can be used for fighting poverty. Madame Albina Chua from the National Bureau of Statistics of Tanzania was very glad to learn about the success of Zanzibar. Zanzibar was one of these regional runaways that had great success in the country in fighting poverty at a faster pace than Rwanda. And she also knows, she also tells us that this has encouraged the country to develop their own MPI, the national MPI. Now, Charles Lufumfa was very interested in showing how these interlinkages between different indicators and different compositions of poverty show that policy has to be multidimensional and an intersectoral approach should be applied in order to fight poverty. So no silos of education, health, or living standards dimensions would fight poverty as effectively as fighting it in different fronts. Ayodele Odusola from UNDP Africa said that he really enjoys the fact of being able to compare 475 different regions, subnational regions in Africa that are something that is not possible with a $1 a day picture that only gives national estimates. Saba Salpai from the Islamic Development Bank enjoyed the comparison of the relationship between climatic conditions, population growth, and the MPI provides a very good analysis for policy making. And Pali Lehola from the Statistical Bureau of South Africa enjoys the fact that South Africa has been the country in which poverty was reduced the fastest in relative terms, or well, relative to its starting point. And they are also conducting check or a way to how to understand how the weighting scheme reflects the living conditions and community aspects in South Africa. Again, the motivation of these measures are the capability approach, in which we are not only interested in describing poverty, but in using these tools to fight actively poverty and with vigor. This is possible only thanks to the hard work of a very big and very enthusiastic team. We are also thankful to our data issuers because they donate the data for us to conduct this multidimensional poverty analysis, and also to UNDP and the Human Development Report Office that has supported us in in carrying out this analysis.